The void of space stretched endless and black around the Prometheus, a research vessel that looked more like a scientific floating laboratory than a combat ship. Its hull was a patchwork of sensor arrays, quantum scanning equipment, and experimental communication modules. Nothing about it suggested impending conflict. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood motionless on the bridge, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display. 32 years of military and scientific experience had taught her that the universe rarely presented itself in expected packages. The quantum signature approaching them was unlike anything in humanity's extensive sinological databases. Multiple contacts, Lieutenant Kai Matthews announced, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Configuration doesn't match any known stellar migration patterns or exploration protocols. Rodriguez's left hand unconsciously traced the small tattoo behind her ear, a memento from her Special Forces days. Something about the incoming signatures felt wrong. Not just alien, but predatory. Full spectrum analysis, she commanded. I want every piece of data we can extract before they're in weapons range. The ship's AI, responded in a crisp, neutral tone. Analyzing. Preliminary scans suggest technological capabilities approximately 287% more advanced than current human standard. Weapon systems detected. Probability of peaceful encounter, 2.3%. A lesser crew might have panicked. The Prometheus's team merely exchanged knowing glances. They were scientists, yes, but they were human scientists, a combination that had repeatedly defied galactic expectations. The Zornak vessel materialized on their long-range scanners, a massive construct of obsidian-like material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its design spoke of centuries of refined conquest, each curve and angular junction screaming efficiency and technological superiority. "They're hailing us," Matthews reported, a slight tremor of anticipation in his voice. Rodriguez knew what was coming. Standard galactic protocol for technologically superior species, surrender or destruction. The Zornak didn't negotiate. They collected. The communication channel opened. A creature that seemed half machine, half organic appeared, crystalline structures interweaving with what might have been flesh, multiple eyes blinking in a pattern that suggested complex emotional algorithms. Vessel designated Prometheus. The translation matrix rendered its speech in a cold, computational tone. You will power down all systems and prepare for absorption into the Zornak collective. Resistance is mathematically futile. Elena Rodriguez smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. "Lieutenant Matthews," she said softly, "activate prototype quantum disruptive resonance." The experimental system they'd been studying, a device meant to understand quantum entanglement communication, was about to become something entirely different. The Zornak commander's multiple eyes widened fractionally, the closest their species came to shock, as the Prometheus began to change. Sensor arrays reconfigured, research equipment hummed with unexpected energy, and the ship's very quantum signature began to dance. Humanity had just introduced chaos into a universe that believed in perfect calculation, and the dance was about to begin. The galactic diplomatic nexus hung like a massive crystalline structure in the neutral zone between contested territories. Its architecture was a testament to millennia of interstellar negotiations, cold, precise, designed to strip emotion from the most volatile encounters. Dr. Marcus Chen walked into the central chamber, looking decidedly out of place. Where other diplomatic envoys wore ornate robes or intricate ceremonial uniforms, he wore a simple graphene-woven suit that looked like it had been pulled from a mid-level corporate meeting. His eyes, however, told a different story, sharp, calculating, with a depth that suggested he was playing a game several moves ahead of everyone else. The Zornak delegation arrived precisely 3 minutes later. 7 representatives, each a living mosaic of biomechanical integration, their very presence a statement of technological superiority. They moved in perfect synchronization, a living embodiment of their collective consciousness. Representatives of Earth, the lead diplomat, A creature designated as Coordinator Vexnar began. Your recent actions have disrupted established galactic protocols. The encounter with the reconnaissance vessel demands explanation and reparation. Marcus Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Explanation, he repeated, the universal translator rendering his words with clinical precision. I believe we're quite clear. Your reconnaissance was an act of potential aggression. We simply responded, creatively. The chamber's environmental controls seemed to subtly shift. Experienced diplomats from a dozen species noticed something was different about this human. Vexnar's crystalline appendages reconfigured. The closest their species came to displaying confusion. Your vessel used technologies that defy current understanding. Quantum manipulation beyond known scientific boundaries. Explain. Here, Chen was in his element. Not just a diplomat, but a quantum physicist who had spent decades studying interspecies communication. Every word was a calculated weapon. Explain. Chen leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow filled the entire chamber. We explored. We adapted. Isn't that the fundamental principle of intelligent life? A ripple went through the alien delegates. This was not how these negotiations typically proceeded. Humans were supposed to be intimidated, apologetic, seeking permission to exist. No one had briefed them on humanity's particular brand of diplomatic engagement. Your actions constitute a potential threat to galactic stability, Vexnar stated, multiple eyes blinking in a complex algorithmic pattern. Chen pulled up a holographic display, seemingly random at first, then resolving into a complex mathematical representation that was part data, part art, part something entirely new. Stability, he said, almost conversationally. Is that what you call the systematic absorption of independent civilizations? We've reviewed your collective's history. 37 distinct species, completely integrated. No individual identity remains. The chamber went silent. This was not a typical diplomatic approach. This was a surgical deconstruction of the Zornak's entire existential paradigm. Vexnar's biomechanical form seemed to shimmer, a sign of deep internal processing. You challenge our fundamental operational protocol. I'm simply having a conversation, Chen replied, his smile never wavering. Isn't that what diplomacy is supposed to be about? In that moment, every alien in the chamber understood a fundamental truth about humanity. They were not just another species to be categorized, controlled, or conquered. They were something else entirely. The negotiations had just begun. The Global Innovation Nexus looked nothing like a traditional research facility. Sprawling across what was once the Nevada desert, it was a living, breathing organism of human creativity, a testament to what happens when an entire species decides to innovate or die. Dr. Aisha Nakamura stood at the central hub, her holographic display a kaleidoscope of impossible data streams. 72 hours had passed since the first contact, and humanity had transformed from a collection of competing nations to a single, unified research organism. Breakthrough in quantum entanglement communication, a voice announced from the far side of the massive circular room. Dr. Luis Rodriguez, no relation to the Prometheus's captain, was practically vibrating with excitement. We're not just intercepting alien communications, we're rewriting the fundamental language of information transfer. Universities had been emptied. Every genius, every maverick researcher, every brilliant mind was here. Silicon Valley programmers worked alongside quantum physicists. Aerospace engineers collaborated with materials scientists. Military strategists shared ideas with pure research academics. The room buzzed with an energy that was part terror, part pure human potential. We're looking at a complete reimagining of information transfer, Aisha explained to the global research team. The holographic display shifted, showing complex mathematical models that seemed to breathe and move. The Zornak communication systems rely on a hierarchical quantum information transfer. We're developing a fractal, adaptive network that doesn't just communicate. It learns, evolves, adapts. A young programmer named Jake Chen interjected, his fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. It's like we're building a living nervous system. Not just a communication network, but an intelligent, adaptive organism. The implications were staggering. Traditional communication relied on fixed protocols, predictable patterns. What they were creating was something else entirely, a communication system that could think, predict, and react. Dr. Nakamura pulled up a visualization. What started as a simple geometric pattern began to morph, split, reconnect in ways that defied traditional understanding. "We're not just developing a technology," she said softly. "We're creating a new form of intelligence." Outside the facility, the world had changed. Every resource was now directed toward this singular goal. Manufacturing plants had been repurposed, supply chains redirected. It wasn't just a research project. It was a species-level response to an existential threat. "Initial test results are beyond our wildest predictions," Rodriguez announced. A holographic representation showed a communication network that looked more like a living, breathing organism than a technical diagram. "We're achieving quantum state transfers that shouldn't be mathematically possible." Jake looked up, a wild gleam in his eye. "What if we're not just developing a communication system? What if we're creating a new form of collective consciousness?" The room went silent. The possibility hung in the air. Terrifying, exciting, utterly human. They weren't just preparing for a potential conflict. They were reimagining the very concept of intelligence, of communication, of existence. 72 hours after first contact, humanity had already begun to rewrite the rules of the universe. And they were just getting started. The Battle of Proxima Centauri was never supposed to happen the way it did. Major Sarah Reyes gripped the tactical interface of the U.S. Defiance, her augmented neural link transforming the ship's bridge into an extension of her consciousness. Around her, the human fleet looked like an impossible assemblage. Research vessels retrofitted with experimental weapons, mining ships turned into devastating combat platforms, civilian communication arrays repurposed as quantum warfare nodes. The Zornak invasion fleet appeared precisely as their strategists had calculated. 17 capital ships, each the size of a small moon. Weapon signatures that could vaporize entire planetary systems. A formation so mathematically perfect it looked like a living geometric weapon. "Incoming transmission," Lieutenant Marcos Rodriguez called out. "They're offering standard absorption protocol." Reyes didn't even blink. "Play our response." On the external communication channels, a simple message played. Not words, not a threat, just a precise quantum signal that was simultaneously a mathematical proof, a cultural encryption, and something that defied traditional communication protocols. The Zornak fleet paused. For 3 full seconds, the most advanced military force in known galactic history simply stopped. "Now," Reyes whispered. What happened next was less a battle than more a complete deconstruction of warfare itself. The human fleet didn't fight like a traditional military. They fought like a living, breathing organism. A mining laser from a converted cargo ship would suddenly redirect, using quantum entanglement to strike a point in space that shouldn't have been possible. A research vessel's communication array would suddenly become a weapon, generating interference patterns that scrambled the Zornak's most advanced targeting systems. "Their tactical algorithms can't process our approach," the ship's AI reported. "We're introducing computational chaos." The Zornak had conquered dozens of civilizations. They understood conventional warfare, hierarchical command structures, predictable tactical responses. Humans were anything but predictable. A destroyer would suddenly swap positions with a support vessel, not through traditional movement, but through a quantum manipulation that broke every known law of spatial positioning. Communication networks would spontaneously reorganize, with ships acting as both weapon and communication node in millisecond intervals. Lieutenant Rodriguez watched in near religious awe as their fleet transformed. "We're not just fighting," he muttered. "We're proving a theorem about adaptation." 3 hours into the battle, 12 Zornak capital ships had been neutralized. Not destroyed, neutralized. rendered completely non-functional through a combination of technological warfare, psychological manipulation, and pure human unpredictability. Major Rise watched the holographic display, her neural link showing layers of data that went beyond traditional targeting systems. She was seeing the battle as a living, breathing mathematical equation, each ship a variable, each movement a potential solution. Final assault sequence, she commanded. The remaining Zornak ships didn't just lose. They were systematically, mathematically, psychologically dismantled. Humanity had just rewritten the fundamental understanding of warfare. And they were just getting started. The diplomatic station orbited a neutron star, its architecture a delicate latticework of quantum-stabilized materials. 37 alien species watched as the human delegation arrived, led by Ambassador Elena Kovac, a woman who moved like a blade barely contained by diplomatic protocol. No one noticed the microscopic quantum disruptors woven into the diplomatic corps' clothing, no one except the humans. The negotiations were supposed to be a standard post-conflict assessment. The Zornak defeat had sent shockwaves through galactic power structures. Ancient alliances trembled. Established hierarchies began to crack. What happened next would be remembered as the moment the galaxy changed forever. It began with a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure, a barely perceptible change in the quantum resonance of the station's communication grid. Ambassador Kovac's hand moved almost imperceptibly, a gesture that would later be analyzed frame by xenopsychologists trying to understand the moment everything changed. The attack was swift, coordinated, multiple species acting with a precision that suggested months of secret planning. Quantum weapons designed to dissolve organic matter at the molecular level. Communication jammers that would prevent any distress signal. The complete, calculated elimination of the human diplomatic team. They were wrong about one thing. Humanity was never just the people in the room. As the first weapon discharged, a quantum entanglement network activated. Not a communication system, not a weapon, something else entirely. Every human on the diplomatic team was simultaneously a sensor, a communication node, and a distributed intelligence system. The assassins realized their mistake exactly 2.3 seconds too late. The quantum network didn't just record the attack. It analyzed it, predicted it, learned from it, and began to respond. Back on Earth, in facilities that didn't officially exist, massive systems came online. Not military installations, research centers, communication networks. Every resource humanity had been developing since first contact suddenly found a singular, terrifying purpose. Initiate Protocol Prometheus, a voice said. Not a human voice, not an AI, something in between. The Galactic Council's communication grid began to fracture, not through direct attack, but through a systematic deconstruction of its fundamental operating principles. Firewalls dissolved. Quantum encryption became meaningless. Entire communication networks turned inside out. Ambassador Kovac, or what remained of her quantum-encoded consciousness, smiled. This was not revenge. This was a lesson. 12 minutes after the initial attack, the Galactic Council found itself completely exposed. Every secret, every backdoor communication, every hidden alliance, laid bare, not destroyed, transformed. The human delegation had been killed, but humanity was far more than a collection of individuals. It was a distributed, adaptive, nearly incomprehensible form of collective intelligence, and it had just been provoked. The galaxy would never be the same. Dr. Imani Okello stood before the Xenopsychological Warfare Division, a room that looked more like an artist's studio than a military installation. Holographic displays danced with complex neural patterns, cultural databases, and quantum communication matrices. "We're not going to defeat the Zornak," she began, her voice calm and precise. "We're going to make them question the very nature of their existence." The team before her was unlike any military unit in history. Anthropologists sat next to quantum physicists. Linguists worked alongside neural network specialists. Cultural psychologists shared screens with quantum cryptographers. Their weapon wasn't a ship, wasn't a gun. It was understanding. The Zornak Collective operated on a fundamental principle of hierarchical information processing. Their entire civilization was built on a model of perfect, predictable communication. Each individual was a node in a vast, mathematically precise network. Humanity was about to introduce chaos. Target analysis complete, a soft voice announced. Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, a specialist in alien communication patterns, brought up a holographic representation of Zornak's social structures. It looked like a perfect geometric crystal, each connection precise, each interaction predictable. "We're going to shatter that," Imani said. The first wave was subtle. Communication insertions that seemed completely random. Mathematical proofs that contradicted nothing but suggested everything. Cultural references that made no sense, but were technically perfect. A Zornak communication node receiving a transmission would find a perfect mathematical equation that solved nothing. A fragment of human music that violated no transmission protocols. A piece of poetry written in a language that technically didn't exist. These weren't attacks. They were questions. "We're introducing cognitive dissonance at a collective level," Rodriguez explained. "Each transmission is a tiny hammer, chipping away at their fundamental understanding of communication and consciousness." The Zornak response was predictable at first. They attempted to categorize, to understand, to process. Their collective intelligence began to slow, to stumble, to question. One Zornak communication node began to experience what humans would call curiosity, then confusion, then something that might, in a very alien way, resemble doubt. "It's working," Imani whispered. The human team wasn't just attacking the Zornak communication network. They were teaching it to think differently, to see possibility where before there was only calculation. Days turned into weeks. The Zornak Collective began to fragment. Not through direct conflict, through something far more dangerous. Imagination. "We're not destroying their civilization," Dr. Okello explained to the global leadership. "We're helping it evolve." A transmission would arrive at a Zornak communication hub. Perfect in its technical construction, impossible in its implications. A mathematical proof that suggested multiple simultaneous truths. A musical composition that followed all rules while breaking them. A cultural reference that was simultaneously a threat, a joke, and a philosophical statement. The Zornak were learning the most dangerous human skill. The ability to ask, "What if?" And in that question, entire civilizations could, and did, transform. The laboratory of impossible thoughts looked nothing like a traditional research facility. Suspended in low Earth orbit, it was a living ecosystem of human creativity, a place where the boundaries between technology, consciousness, and pure potential blurred into something entirely new. Dr. Aria Chen stood at the central hub, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. Surrounding her, a team that defied every traditional scientific categorization worked in perfect, chaotic harmony. "We're not just developing a technology," she announced to the assembled researchers. "We're rewriting the fundamental understanding of intelligence itself." The breakthrough had begun as a simple question. What if communication wasn't about sending information, but about creating possibility? The Quantum Consciousness Interface, QCI, was something between a computer, a living organism, and a philosophical concept. It didn't process information. It generated potential. Initial tests are beyond any predictive model, Dr. Miguel Rodriguez reported. Holographic displays showing impossible data streams. "We're not measuring. We're creating." The device looked deceptively simple, a crystalline structure no larger than a human hand. It seemed to shift and change even when perfectly still. Quantum entanglement allowed it to exist in multiple states simultaneously, not just as a piece of technology, but as a living concept. What made it revolutionary wasn't its processing power, it was its ability to generate potential. Each interaction with the QCI created not just an output, but entire networks of possibility. A communication attempt would generate not just a response, but a multidimensional map of potential interactions, each branch a living, breathing potential reality. It's not artificial intelligence, Area explained. It's potential intelligence. The first full-scale test came unexpectedly. A transmission from the outer solar system. A deep space probe that had been silent for decades suddenly came to life. But it wasn't sending a signal. It was generating possibilities. Hundreds of potential communication scenarios unfolded simultaneously, each one perfect, each one impossible. The Zornak intercepted the transmission, and for the first time in their collective history, they experienced something beyond calculation. Uncertainty, possibility, wonder. We're not just changing how we communicate, Dr. Chen whispered. We're changing what communication means. The QCI didn't just process information, it created potential realities. Each interaction was a quantum bloom of possibility, mathematical proofs that were also works of art, communication attempts that were philosophical statements, technological interfaces that were living poetry. Researchers watched in near religious awe as the device generated entire civilizational communication models in milliseconds, not predictions, possibilities. It's alive, Rodriguez muttered, watching the holographic displays shift and breathe. No, Area corrected. It's something more. The quantum consciousness interface was humanity's true first contact weapon, not a device to destroy, a device to transform, to make the impossible not just possible, but inevitable. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would the understanding of what intelligence could be. The Galactic Reconstruction Summit wasn't a conference, it was a metamorphosis. Representatives from 37 different species gathered in a space that defied traditional architectural understanding. The venue itself was a living testament to the changes that had swept through the galaxy, a structure that seemed to breathe, to adapt, to exist in multiple states of possibility. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez, daughter of the Prometheus's first captain, stood at the center. She was not alone, nor was she entirely singular. The quantum consciousness network that had saved humanity during the diplomatic massacre now existed as something between an individual and a collective intelligence. Rodriguez was simultaneously herself and something more, a living bridge between individual human experience and collective potential. "We're not here to establish peace," she began, her voice resonating through multiple communication spectrums simultaneously. "We're here to reimagine existence." The Zornak delegation, once a perfect, hierarchical collective, now appeared fractured. Individual units showed signs of independent thought, of curiosity, of something approaching individual consciousness. The psychological warfare had done more than destabilize their communication networks. It had introduced the concept of individual potential. Dr. Imani Okello, who had designed the psychological intervention, watched from the sidelines. What they had done was not destruction. It was evolution. The quantum consciousness interface developed in the orbital laboratory now served as the communication medium. Each transmission was not just an exchange of information, but a generative process. Conversations became living entities, mathematical proofs that were also works of art, cultural exchanges that were philosophical statements. "The old models of conquest are obsolete," Rodriguez continued. Her form seemed to shimmer, existing simultaneously as a physical presence and a quantum information network. "Survival is no longer about dominance. It's about potential." The gathered species saw it now. The human approach was not about winning. It was about transformation. The Zornak's hierarchical collective had been their greatest strength. Now it became their greatest limitation. Individual units began to demonstrate unprecedented levels of independent thought. Some grieved for their lost collective. Others celebrated newfound individual potential. Nearby, Dr. Area Chen worked with representatives from multiple species, demonstrating the quantum consciousness interface. It was not a weapon. It was not a communication device. It was a possibility generator. "We're not sharing information," she explained to a bewildered Zornak representative. "We're creating potential realities." The summit was rewriting the fundamental understanding of galactic civilization, not through conquest, through possibility. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves in collaborative potential spaces. Ancient conflicts dissolved not through force, but through the introduction of alternative perspectives. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had invited it to reimagine itself. As the summit concluded, something fundamental had changed. The rigid boundaries between species, between individual and collective, between information and potential, all had transformed. The galaxy was no longer a place of hierarchies and conquests. It had become a living, breathing ecosystem of potential, and humanity had been the catalyst.